What kind of life is worth living? The most common perspective on what life is like much more resembles a race than an experience. People establish clear stages of what life should be and how it should be. Studying, working, getting married, having children, working, retiring, and perhaps only then living, in part. These are symptoms of the overvaluation of work and productivity. But asking what the meaning of life is a frequent questioning as long as humans have been humans. In today's video, we're going back 2,300 years in time, but we're heading straight to Athens in ancient Greece. The most popular place of the time was probably the Agora of Athens, a very important public space full of life, where merchants shared space with spectacles and heated discussions about politics, life, and philosophy. But not all that remained of the Agora were its ruins. Many of the ideas that were tested at that time managed to survive all these years in a special area of the Agora called the Painted Stoa, where Zeno of Citium began to expose his ideas, which later led to Stoicism. Yes, Stoicism comes from Stoa. Zeno was quite unlucky in one of the anecdotes about his life. It is said that he was a rather wealthy and prosperous merchant until he made a boat trip across the Mediterranean Sea. During this trip, he faced a strong storm and lost all his material possessions, leaving only his own life. Faced with a situation that would make many give up everything and everyone, Zeno sought refuge in rationality to understand how to react to the unpredictability of life. And that's where Stoicism began to take shape as a philosophy that seeks to use reason to deal with emotions, to avoid vices and cultivate virtues. For this, it would be necessary to face life with a certain apathy. This means to avoid the excesses of passion, neither becoming too excited with pleasures nor too affected by hardships. But forget for a moment the common sense of the words apathy and passion. Apathy or apatheia comes from the Greek a, meaning negation, and pathos, meaning passion. Thus, apathy would be the absence of passions, but in a very specific sense of passion as a disturbed state of the soul, a controlling and violent emotion. To achieve tranquility, apathy, we need to identify and separate the things we have control over from those we do not. And this is not an easy task. It requires a special combination of ideas. Therefore, Stoic philosophy is composed of three components: ethics, logic, and physics, but not in the modern sense of these words. Remember, we are in ancient Greece. Although ethics is part of the historical philosophy that most catches people's attention, Stoicism is a complex framework of ideas to help us understand. But usually we turn to Diogenes Laertius, an important biographer of Greek philosophy, or rather, one of the greatest gossipers of all time. In one of his works, he writes that the Stoics saw philosophy as a living creature, in which logic was the bones, ethics the flesh, and physics the soul. The Stoics believed in a perfectly ordered and harmonious universe, in which everything has a reason for being and is predetermined. The laws of this universe are distributed in all of us consistently and eternally. In this sense, they had a deterministic view of the world. The universe would be a structure constituted like a great web of causes and effects, so that the present state is the result of a chain of past causes, and this sequence of causes is unavoidable. The universe follows its course independent of us. But at the same time, this can sound scary. The Stoics saw it as a great relief, a way to worry less about what we cannot control. Hence the famous phrase attributed to Seneca, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." If the events of the universe are not yours and are not under your control, then all you can do is be rational enough to deal with your own reactions and emotions to the responsible course of life. You cannot control 99% of the things that will happen to you, but you can control how you react to them. So this brings us back to the question, how can we become happy? Happiness is the ultimate good, the final goal of human achievement. Therefore, they developed an ethics focused on virtue, with four main pillars: wisdom, justice, courage, and moderation. Wisdom would be about understanding the events of the world logically and calmly. Justice would be about acting without bias when evaluating people and situations. Courage would be knowing what to fear and what to endure. And moderation would be about balancing desires, seeking simplicity, and avoiding vices. They are all complementary to each other and constitute what we call virtuousness. But acting virtuously is only possible if we know the nature of the cosmos rationally, especially if we know that our human nature differs from that of other beings because we have a more developed rationality. Acting according to the laws of nature would be acting rationally. Otherwise, we would be disrespecting the structure of the universe, going against the inevitable flow of events, and that is a violation of physical and logical laws. Life, beauty, strength, reputation, and wealth, and their opposites, ugliness, weakness, and poverty, are indifferent. They possess no inherent positive or negative value. It is us who make them good or bad. Therefore, we must be apathetic about the events imposed on us. But apathy is not about rejecting emotions, it is about knowing how to control them. It is not about being passive in the world, but about knowing how far you can act. The world is opaque, and the laws of nature are invincible. But this does not remove from us the responsibility of our actions. We cannot control diseases, but we can make healthy choices and avoid them. But even so, if by chance we get sick one day, we must accept it with courage and wisdom. We have no control over the actions of others, whether they curse us or love us. But we can avoid anger and cultivate justice and moderation. Everything that happens to us is a loan from the universe, including life. To be wise is to recognize this. With courage, it is to know that we can have glory without being glorious, just as we can lose without being losers. Over the years, Stoicism spread beyond ancient Greece. It began to flourish mainly in Rome, with Seneca, Epictetus, and the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. With what we know of Epictetus, the slave, the accounts of his disciples, as he left nothing written, only Seneca and Marcus Aurelius left original works. In the case of Marcus Aurelius, his book, Meditations, seems to have been written as a kind of diary on how to deal with and perfect his attitudes, almost as guidelines for himself to carry on his life as the Roman emperor. Each of them had a particularly difficult life. Seneca was condemned to take his own life. Epictetus was a slave for a long time. And Marcus Aurelius was emperor of Rome for almost 20 years. So it is natural to expect that they reflected on death and life, freedom and slavery, control and excess. They wrote many letters during their lives, some of them intended to console their friends, although they did so in a very peculiar way. As a historian, it would not make sense for Epictetus to tell his friends to wait for better days. He spoke to the contrary. They should expect the worst, be prepared for it. Imagine asking for help from someone, and the person tells you there's no point in lamenting and crying over events from an endlessly uncontrollable universe. You should have prepared for situations of great disaster and cheered yourself in scarcity instead of cultivating vices and constant pleasures and being enslaved by your ambitions. Now I advise you to be more rational, to learn about virtues, and to have the courage and wisdom to accept the inevitability of life's events with as much apathy as possible. This may sound a bit harsh, perhaps not at all motivational. But for the Stoics, the sooner a person understands how to act according to nature, the better. And that's where the idea comes from that the greatest sufferings and disturbances are not the facts of the world themselves, but rather the judgments we make of them. And what is the greatest misfortune if not death? Death was a central element in historical philosophy, said to be the most intimate mark of life. It is what is always present, what makes life fragile, and at the same time, makes life worth living. Seneca goes even further, saying that life is all about learning to die. Wisdom is to recognize that life is something that has been lent to us, and we must return it without sadness when it is claimed. And that's what he did when he received his death sentence. He criticized the way people act inconsistently about their own mortality. But we wish to enjoy life, yet we postpone that moment as if we were immortal and had all the time in the world. But we only realize our fragility when we lose something, and only then do we act as mortals. Life is not brief, but we make it brief when we dedicate ourselves to things beyond our control. Stoicism emerged more than 2,000 years ago in a completely different place than it is today, in a society extremely distant from ours in terms of economics, politics, technology, and culture. We are separated by time, by space, and by history, and yet we are united by the same doubts. What is life? How should it be lived? Let's talk about it here in the comments. Thank you very much, and until next time.